Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our Research Talk Qualitative Conversations series. Today, we are really looking forward to time with one of our great friends and colleagues, Sally Thorne. She'll tell you more about her wonderful life in just a little bit. So we'll go through that. I'm Ray Mayetta, president of Research Talk. I am not only a qualitative research methodologist, but also a sociologist. Right now, we are in the midst of diving in with data about lifelong friendships, and we have conversations, dyadic conversations with two friends who have been friends for generally over 30 years. We have a couple of younger pairs that haven't been friends that long, one pair that isn't old enough to have a friendship of 30 years yet. But anyway, so it's just kind of fun to just let them go. And if you haven't tried dyadic interviews, I would say they're great to, especially when you choose well the topic and the fit, and so it's a good thing. Anyway, that's enough about me. I'm going to ask my colleagues to just do a short introduction. I'll start with my colleague, Paul Mihas.
Hi, I'm Paul Mihas. I'm a qualitative researcher and consultant at the Odom Institute for Research in Social Science at UNC Chapel Hill. I've also been with Research Talk as a consultant since 2001.
And you're doing something special this summer at the Summer Intensive, aren't you?
And I'm co-teaching a course on coding and analysis with Karen Campbell.
Wonderful. It's going to be a great kind of dynamic look at the coding and analysis process. Thank you so much, Paul. And then Jeff, let me have you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Jeff Petruzzelli. I've been with Research Talk also since 2001, and I'm a qualitative research specialist here.
All right. Thank you so much. And Sally, tell us a little bit about Sally Thorne.
Sure, I'm Sally Thorne. I'm a professor emeritus in the School of Nursing at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And although I don't take a salary from the university anymore, I still work every day because I love my work. And my research over the last few years has been in medical assistance in dying, which you can imagine is incredibly rich and complex and nuanced and interesting phenomenon that nurses and others are very actively engaged with. But it's shifting so many conversations in our country, and it is such a topic that's amenable to qualitative inquiry. And the qualitative inquiry is actually influencing policy in a way that I've never seen in my career before. So that's me, and that's my current excitement in qualitative inquiry.
That's so exciting. I love that topic. That whole area is so necessary. Wonderful. So we have two pieces to our conversation today. First, we're going to talk with Sally about a book, or a new edition of a book that she's near and dear to her heart. But the new edition came out last June in 2025, Interpretive Description, Qualitative Research for Applied Practice. So we'll begin with a conversation about that, and then segue to a course that Sally's taught for us several times, and it's just so powerful for folks. And that title of that course is Qualitative Research for Applied Practice. That will be available August 5th and 6th. And as FYI for anybody listening, we will have a link for you to the course information and also to the book. So that'll be available for you in the recording. So we'll have that and we'll go from there. So why don't we begin, Sally, with a conversation about the book? And before we get to content, discuss the book's availability in open access format. I know that's something you're very happy that you were able to work to make that the case.
Yeah, I was thrilled to be able to make it open access because I just can't, I'm not a marketer, first of all, and then I can't believe that it would be so difficult for people in different parts of the world to be able to access literature. So I worked hard in this process to ensure that we could get to a good agreement to make it fully open access. And on the publisher, the Routledge website, you can find an open access link, but it's a little bit hard to find. The easier one is to Google me. And in my home university webpage, it's front and center, so that, that's a very easy way to access the link to the open access. I wouldn't want anybody to have to buy the book if they really prefer to have the open access version.
I think that link that you just mentioned too is what we have in our course description or bio for you. Well, one of those, the course description, I believe.
Yeah. Right. Make it as easily accessible as possible.
Wonderful. Yeah. And you're so right about access internationally, and even, wherever it is in our countries too. There's lots of folks for whom this is just a gift. It's a wonderful, powerful.
Well, many people who are taking it up are at an early stage in their career, graduate students or early career researchers who are not always established in their own tradition and trying to figure out how to answer questions. And some of them, to be able to actually engage with the book is it's designed for people who don't have necessarily access to the full set of mentors that they would like, and they've got lots of questions and they want to engage. So in the writing of it, it's written with somebody at that career stage particularly in mind.
Wonderful. Jeff, you wanted to start off segueing us into content.
Yeah, so Sally, if you could just give us a brief overview of what's new in this new edition.
Two answers to that one. One is the basic idea of interpreter description is very much the way it was in the first edition way back in 2008, and even in the first article about that method in 1997. The basic idea is the same, but so much has changed in the world of qualitative research. There's so many different ways of thinking about data collection, kinds of data, modalities of doing work. All of it's amenable to being approached with an interpreter description lens. And the interpreter description lens essentially is the basic idea that those in the applied and practice disciplines actually have a baked in epistemological structure. Their theoretical framework is their discipline. They're out there with that lens on, asking questions every day, reflecting on what's going on here. What do I know? Why don't I understand this? And so the kinds of inquiry designs that come out of those applied questions are what it's trying to facilitate. And the world has changed. More and more people are doing mixed methods, for example. So there's much more about mixed methods. There's also sort of a competing world of different kinds of arguments about why you should use this method or that method. And I'm not going to get involved in the bun fight of saying my method is better than other people's methods at all. But to say that this is an approach to research that can fit with all kinds of other methods. It's not a contest. But that for those in the applied disciplines to be able to take that perspective into your research, make sure you don't get lost in just following through with a methodological guide, that you continue to be directed by what was the inquiry in the first place. Why did you ask that research question? And who is the audience that you need that knowledge for? And you tie those things together clearly. And can make all kinds of design modifications along the path of your research. So the idea is a basic one in one way, but it's also a profoundly complex one because people are not accustomed to the idea that methodology can be evolving and iterative as you engage with a study, and that you can and will and do make choices along the way, much as a clinician would never just take a standard care plan for a patient and then follow it no matter what. You're making those modifications as your mind engages, as you become more insightful about things. So it's guiding that process of becoming more insightful about things along the course of a research study without losing track of your direction, but having that freedom to think critically and reflect and make the choices that make sense.
So by no means are you presenting, here are the steps and just follow this, it's prescriptive at all. You're really, it sounds like, providing the undergird, the knowledge, the principles, the ways to be ready when decisions have to be made, whether they're within the plan you might have laid out at the beginning, or, well, that changes things. So.
Absolutely. And for some people, there's a hope that qualitative methodology will give you a lockstep prescription for how to do it and follow through the steps. I fully understand that. We've all been early on in our qualitative research. It feels like it would be more sensible, and we're on safer ground if we've got lockstep. But I am absolutely convinced that thoughtful clinicians always bump up against whatever the methodological tradition is in some way. And so this is really a way of ensuring that you're not just doing whatever you feel like. It's not random and it's not frivolous, but you're grounding in what is the guidance for those decisions that happen along the way of a really engaged qualitative study that may well have some fairly profound course changes along the course of a qualitative project.
And when you mentioned the term lockstep, which I love, when folks have an anxiety about that and they're thinking, oh no, I need to, stay here and process, isn't it? Oh, I don't know about more acute, but it's particularly acute with analysis, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And data analysis is often the time when people get a bit nervous if they're newer qualitative researchers and try and ground themselves in a lockstep guide. Somebody to tell me to do this, do this, do this. And I think that's often where research goes a little bit sideways, because you had a good idea, you've engaged, you've created a really rich data set, but then you sort of fall into the trap of leaning on analysis methodology, like a classic thematic analysis, which sounds really simple. In the 2006 article of Braun and Clark that has been cited over 200,000 times, which tells you how many people are going to that, it is unbelievably simplistic. And the way I would describe it, and I've described it in the book, is that I see that approach as essentially trying to characterize a database, not answering a research question. Because a database in the applied practice world, when applied practitioners are seeking to understand something, they will also encounter a great deal of data that is as they would have expected, by virtue of their clinical practice, by virtue of their review of the literature that we would all do in encountering a research question. So we will encounter a lot of what was expected, but that's not why we set out to do the research in the first place. We set out to do that because we felt that there were some new and important insights that needed to be gained. And so we're going for those insights. What are the things we can learn here? What are the things that were unexpected? What are the nuances of how things connect together in ways that we didn't understand? And so we aren't doing qualitative research in the applied and practice disciplines in order to recreate what we already know. We do it because we suspect there's something, if we really dig deeply and try and understand it with more richness and more fullness and all the beautiful nuances that can come up, if we were to really dig into that, there are ways of understanding it that could help us in some manner to be better practitioners or to create better healthcare systems. So we are answering research questions that take us beyond what we already know. And an analysis approach that keeps encouraging us back in that direction, rather than falling prey to the more simplistic, what are the themes in all of what people said, which may or may not provide anything new to the field.
Yeah. That database orientation, it's one of the many ways, whether people are aware or not, of these kind of borrowed notions from quant. And it's like, it's okay to stray in a direction that, in fact, is really more fruitful to understanding and moving forward people's lived experience.
Absolutely. And I mean no disrespect, of course, to Braun and Clark, who've done some marvelous things. And their recent books are much more rich and nuanced. Unfortunately, it is still, I'm a journal editor, and I know how many people still reference that 2006 paper, which is not particularly helpful. It's basically ABCs. And it doesn't mean that people who reference that aren't sometimes doing very good analysis, but it isn't the right life raft to hang on to. Yeah. So instead, the book tries to engage with someone in the analytic process to try and anticipate the kinds of places where they're going to get anxious and the kinds of places where it starts to feel questionable, starts to feel as if you're off adrift and you're not sure whether this is the right answer. You're not sure whether you have permission to do something in a certain way. Often people early on in qualitative research have these sort of anxieties. Am I doing it right? Am I doing it in a way meaningful? And so because I've engaged with people and had emails from people and taught courses with people, and am in constant interaction with people doing qualitative research, I have a pretty good sense of where are the anxiety points along the way. And they're all built into the book. So that's what I mean. It's talking to, it's engaging with the researcher in trying to and think through how that feels.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I just want to check in with you, Paul. We're going to be asking Sally a bit about applied research in a second. But before we do that, I just wanted to, see if there was anything you wanted to kind of think aloud with Sally about.
Sure. Well, I've been thinking about some of the students and other people that I meet with, and you talked about anxiety, and I see that a lot. And part of it for some people is just there's so much jargon in the qualitative, landscape. And what I'm hearing from you is that this book is really creating clarity, and it's showing that this is within their reach, and this is a feasible way of moving forward. So it really is a way of kind of getting confidence and understanding that this is really something that's doable and feasible.
I really do believe that. I live in the world of expert practitioners and thoughtful practitioners, having been a nurse since 1972, more than 50 years. So I live in a world in which the everyday people working in the field often are extremely thoughtful. And those who develop practice excellence have been thinking this way. They're looking for patterns. They're looking for exceptions within the patterns. They're trying to understand them. They're clinical wisdom in these practice fields develops very much on the same path that qualitative analysis and inquiry will. So it's really offering them tools to formalize that into research, that way of thinking into research in a way that can reach other people and reach other audiences and has that integrity. It's certainly not just a free-for-all in thinking. It's got all the checks and balances that you would expect in qualitative research, but it's not necessarily drawing on some of the conventions that we all are familiar with. The transferability, for example, which has sort of questionable relevance in qualitative research. But it's trying to look for things like epistemological integrity and representational authority, and those kinds of criteria that really would allow you to speak with authenticity to your colleagues in the clinical field, to others who might be encountering these kinds of challenges, so that they can accelerate their clinical wisdom. And that's what makes it so interesting, because I honestly do feel that those who develop expertise in an applied and practice field already have a lot of the thinking skills that would suit them well to qualitative inquiry. And even among our quantitative research colleagues, those that have been thinking critically often can find a way to integrate some qualitative research into their studies in a formal way. Interpretive description allows them to do that. They don't need to go back and get another graduate degree in sociology or some other discipline in order to engage. It tries to align what they already have in their intellectual capacities, the kinds of curiosities that they develop, and provide a path forward so that they can find ways to integrate qualitative inquiry into what they do.
Jeff, this is the thing you bring to our camps all the time. Jeff's constantly, Sally, reminding folks the kinds of things that we're bringing forward for you, telling you to do, kind of introducing to you, working with you on, are not things that are brand new to you, right? This is something, Jeff, that you've been wonderful to kind of remind folks throughout, whether it's a course or a camp.
Yeah, absolutely. The qualitative mindset is kind of built into a lot of people's everyday lives. So, there's a lot of things that we do in research that, whether it's writing memos or, kind of just, looking for themes in our lives, things like that. These are things that we are familiar with. And of course, reading and, kind of understanding. So it's, that's what we do.
That's great. So, Sally, the other thing that we think a lot about when we engage with you and think about the book and the course is the applied research piece of this. So we just wanted to hear you talk a little bit about how the idea of applied research is being taken up, and it's increasingly being taken up.
Yeah, the course I've entitled Applied Qualitative Research because it really is research for the applied and practice disciplines. And, that's the sort of fundamental. I started off thinking I was writing for nurses, fellow nurses, fairly quickly realized others in the healthcare disciplines were also interested. But in this third edition of the the interpreter description book, I've come to realize how many disciplines that I would never have thought of have taken up the idea and seem to have been hungry for a path forward in qualitative research. People like library science and mathematics education and fields that would never have occurred to me as being qualitatively oriented. But what's common among them is the idea that people begin with a commitment to a certain worldview as a member of an applied discipline. Applied people exist to do a certain thing in the world, and they have a pretty clear sense of that, and they understand the questions that arise from that. So it's offering a methodology to be able to marry what they already have with a qualitative sensibility and produce all kinds of studies that will add some value to the literature. And so an interpretive description study doesn't necessarily look like another interpretive description study in another discipline. People will take it up in different ways that are consistent with their disciplinary orientation.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And then as we continue thinking about the book, you're also teaching a course with us. And we just wanted to ask you to discuss the synergy between the book and the course.
Yeah, the book and the course are very, very much connected in the sense that the book represents the thinking that I bring to the idea of applied and practice qualitative research. The term interpreter description is really not meant as a very specific method different than any other methods. It's a descriptive term because in the world of nursing, we describe things all the time. That's what we're doing. But we never simply sit with description. We're always asking, so what? What does this mean? Why does this matter? And so interpreter description is a descriptive term for a kind of research that goes on in the applied and practice disciplines. In that way, the two are very connected. In the course, I follow the logic of how this kind of inquiry came out of a world that was fairly constrained when I began as an early qualitative researcher. The rule structures that came from quantitative science were very much present, that you had to articulate exactly methodology and it had to follow the lines of some other discipline that had engaged with it previously. And much of the work that people were doing, they were struggling with that method. In my discipline, nursing took up qualitative research very early on because the kinds of questions that most intrigue us are often not quantitative questions. But that we were not quite satisfied with how it was serving the knowledge needs of the discipline. And in the course, what I try and do is work with people and work them through the logic of how one comes into generating a study and conducting a study, designing it and engaging in it and working through all of the steps of a study that are consistent with the needs of their applied and practice disciplines.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And when we think about your course, it's a cluster of courses we have this year, 4 or 5, that we're put under the umbrella inquiry and practice. So people oftentimes enroll in our courses and, they are involved in a project or they have a project on the horizon and they have this one project mentality. But in reality, as they go through 2 days with you, how does what they're going to learn, experience, and engage with you, how does that really prepare them beyond just one project? The strategies, techniques to really think inquiry and practice beyond just the project on your table now or the next thing on your desk?
Yeah. Well, I think of the course as really a philosophy of qualitative design and conduct. And in that way, I hope it engages with everyone who's in a project, whether the kinds of ideas I'm talking about directly apply to their current project. Many times they do in ways that participants would not have anticipated. They may be coming in saying, I'm doing a phenomenological study or I'm doing a grounded theory study and are not sure whether there's going to be anything on offer. but start to see some modifications they might make, or start to see that some of the ways they already are engaging with their research as not being pure phenomenology or grounded theory at all, being already applied. So, because I do believe that those in the applied disciplines, that mindset that we bring, dominates an awful lot of our thinking. Many times, if people take it up as a philosophy of how to engage in creating the very best kinds of projects that can advance our knowledge in our applied and practice disciplines in meaningful ways, then there was always something that they can take. And often what I hear from people is that what they find is that they've developed some more confidence in some of the things they thought to be true, but they weren't sure they could ever defend. Or they've opened up possibilities to move past what they thought they were constrained by. And they're willing to push more boundaries to say, I don't have to just do it this way. I can also expand in this way. I can take this study in my current design forward. Doctoral students in particular are pretty anxious often about meeting the requirements of their discipline and the expectations of their supervisors. So providing people language that can actually articulate what it is they're doing and why, and provide them some confidence. And frankly, a reference point can be very important in adding to that confidence. I remember that very strongly from being a younger, early career scholar, that if you can't reference that somebody said that this is an okay way to think about this, or an appropriate way to confront this challenge, then you're more vulnerable. So in the course, and certainly in the book, I have tried very hard to provide those reference points, those claims that can really help people substantiate the logic of the places in which they're legitimately pushing boundaries of methodology.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So, Paul, you've thought a lot over the time. You've always been involved with the summer intensive since our first one, and since 2012, we've been partnering with the AUNC's Odom Institute. So you think a lot about how our scholar team teaches, and teaches a course and then teaches it again. So, with that in mind, I want to kind of, I know you have a thoughtful question for Sally in that regard.
Yeah, thanks. So Sally, I'm just wondering, in your experience teaching this course, what have you learned about presenting this topic? What have you learned in teaching it over the years?
One thing I've learned is that there will be people in the course with a little bit of resistance. And some of that resistance may increase as the course progresses, because that they're really hoping for that recipe book, that lockstep method. They're hoping for this is exactly how you must do this. And so in other teaching, my typical style would be to engage the course participants right from the outset in naming their positionality, where they are and what they're doing. I actually suspend some of that engagement until people have had a chance to understand the nature of the thinking that we're going to be doing over that period of time. So I hope that I have learned ways of presuming that there will be people who are a little puzzled at the beginning because they were hoping for a right answer. And rather than having those people push for that right answer right at the outset and sort of disrupt the flow, I control the message for the first part. And I have found that is really helpful to sort of give a group that common sense, that common shared understanding of where we're going and why, and when they will be welcomed and invited to engage, and the permission to not be talking about right answers, but to be engaging in possibilities.
Yeah, it's beautiful. When you've been talking, Sally, I'm thinking about a question we get a lot as people go through the summer intensive list. There's 18 courses. What should I take? How do I decide? One question that folks bring to us oftentimes is about your course. And there are folks who don't immediately see that they'll be doing applied research, but
Yeah.
they read the description and they know you by reputation. And they're thinking, well, wait a minute, I really need to figure out qualitative inquiry. I'm new to it. So we always do let them know that if they take your class, and it really is, you put it beautifully earlier. You talked about how you're really thinking through the philosophy of design and conduct of qual. But somebody who isn't really yet kind of knowing that they're going to dive in full force to applied research, they can still pull out so much in foundational
Yeah.
qualitative inquiry, can't they?
Well, we always in the qualitative world recognize the influence of the researcher on the project. So who you are and what you bring to the thing is fundamentally important in any qualitative research project. It's not just sitting with a data set and analyzing it, but it's engaging in the construction of it in the first place and doing that purposefully. So people who are in applied and practice disciplines might readily recognize that this is going to be their kind of research. It's going to fit for them. But there are lots of people who have an interdisciplinary background who don't necessarily identify with a profession or a discipline. They engage in the world of ideas and might wonder whether this kind of research could apply to them. But so many of them are out there solving problems in the world with their interdisciplinary strengths and skill sets, with their multiple orientations, but they all do have values and philosophical commitments. They're doing this not just for fun or to fulfill a job criterion. They're doing it because they believe in something. So for people who don't immediately identify with an applied discipline as the reason that they're doing research, I think this course can really allow them to engage in what aspects of what they bring profoundly influence that research and how to position that so that they're meeting those same kinds of needs and responsibilities.
That's great. So there are two questions that are similar, and but I'm going to give you both of them. I'll let you talk about. You can talk about one, you can talk about both, you can talk about them together. One is, when you think back, what do you wish someone had told you when you first started doing qualitative research? So, what's that thing was like, oh, if only I had that as I started qualitative in general. But then also, what's an aspect of doing applied practice work that was challenging for you to learn and integrate? So the first is just generally qual, but then something particular, a challenge particular to, doing applied practice work that was difficult for you to figure out.
Sure. I think the thing I wish I had known is that applied qualitative research is very much about critical thinking. And the critical thinking we bring by virtue of who we are in the world and why we're doing what we're doing. Those of us in the applied and practice fields who have come into research come into it because there's a sense that it could advance knowledge in our disciplines and our fields, help us solve the problems that we're in the world to solve. And those disciplines typically, certainly mine does, come with a lot of emphasis on critical thinking and reflection on what's going on and why and what sense do I make of it. And I don't think qualitative methodology, and certainly in the early years of my career, ever approached the idea of critical thinking. It was much more learn from an expert, learn exactly how it's done. It's only when you've really been able to demonstrate your credibility by following through with rigid methodology that you're allowed to actually critically think and reflect on, why am I doing what I'm doing? Should I be modifying it? What would it mean, and how would the influence be if I adjusted my study in a certain way over the course of it? So I think that critical thinking is a piece that was not associated with qualitative research. In my experience in the early days of us taking it up in the health field. But I think it's fundamentally important that qualitative researchers are not simply following through with somebody's design, but they are engaging with the why and the what for, and what does this mean throughout. I think the piece of research that I found most difficult in my early years, and I think many of my colleagues did as well, is data analysis, because it was really portrayed much as inductive reasoning was more of a magical thinking. So somehow you go through this process and eventually take a few steps, do some coding, note making, all of the things you do, and then findings would emerge from the data. That language, Jan Morse wrote a paper on it once, but that language was often used, that as if this was magical thinking and somehow some new fully formed theoretical structure would emerge from the data that you were immersed in, and how you get from one place to the other somehow felt a little bit fraudulent. Were you forcing it in there? Were you trying to find something that might fit? Were you trying to find a model or a structure or some new conceptualization that looked good on paper that wasn't all that connected with the data? So it was kind of a magical process. And I think that over time I've come to realize that much of that early guidance really was providing steps toward thinking, but not talking about thinking.
Nice.
So it's not the steps themselves that were making a difference. The read your transcripts and then reread your transcripts. It's not those two things that make a difference, but it's that thought you put into it. And the kind of engagement that I've really focused on, both in the course and in the book, that I think is helpful to help people not fall into that trap of thinking that analysis is magical thinking, is to really get into the hardcore of how you're thinking about this and what options you have with thinking about data. I'm not a fan of early coding because that sort of presumes you know what the meaning of a thing is, even in the first attachment, first little code you attach to it. And instead saying, what am I seeing here? What's expected? What's not expected? What are collections of things that I'm pretty sure are part of the answer to my question? And I'm going to give them a, collection one. I'm going to give them a vague title so I can group them and think about them and critically reflect on them. But I'm not going to presume that I know in advance that they represent X. So I'm not going to give that a really conceptual label too early on in my process. And I'm not going to imagine I know what that set of findings is going to look like, because I'm going to continue to go back to what was my question in the first place. And even if I didn't ask the question using the right wording, because qualitative researchers who are thinking critically often look back and say, I worked hard and framed that question, but it isn't actually what I wanted to know. What I really wanted to know was this. And I only can see that now that I'm in the middle of the project. So that's an example of a design decision that somebody could make along the way, and say in the middle of their write-up, they can say, along the way, I actually realized what I really wanted to know is this. This is the question that now guides my analysis. So I think that process of analysis, taking it out of magical thinking and just using the theory of inductive reasoning to say that that's how you got there, isn't particularly helpful. And instead engaging people with what are the things you can do with yourself, what are the various tricks and techniques that don't prematurely set the stage for a pattern of what it's going to look like. And absolutely, obviously patterns, thematic thinking is a useful idea. But in my world, in the applied and practice world, if you're not paying attention to those outliers, you're not noticing reality. And it's those differences, not just the patterns, that often give you the insights as to what's really important to know here.
Yeah, you used a word earlier in our conversation that I just want to underscore and bring back, and it was permission. As far as for people new, people learning, whether it's reading the book, whether it's the course, a little bit of both. And I love it. And here you're really paying attention to, you have permission to see yourself and evolve as a critical thinker. You have permission to rethink how you're thinking, to think about your thinking. And this idea that decisions that you have to make, you would have no idea that you had to make those when the project started. When we consult with folks in a project, they're just shocked. It's like, oh, how did I miss that? It's like, relax, don't beat yourself up. It's the nature of the game, and just be aware. Oh, yeah. It's fabulous. So we're going to close with kind of a little bit of a different feel, just two questions, kind of quick thought questions, one by Jeff, one by me. And then if there's anything else anybody else wants to think about, we can, but we're really love taking the time with you. So let me get us going here to wrap up. And Jeff, why don't we segue to you with a question for Sally to consider?
Yeah, Sally, throughout this discussion, your passion and commitment to your work really shines through. So just kind of wondering what keeps you committed and passionate about qualitative inquiry after all this time?
The ways in which qualitative research can add value to so many different kinds of projects, so many disciplinary projects, so many applied and practice disciplines, continues to intrigue me. It's not simply lived experience, which is perhaps where we started in health, thinking that adding lived experience into the configuration made a difference. And of course, that remains important. But so many other aspects of how systems work and how things fit together, how pressures and contexts intersect to influence human experience, for example. So the possibilities are endless. And I love going back to the literature again and again, which I do, to see who's taking up the ideas of applied and practice research, qualitative research, and in what ways and for what purposes and how are they doing that. And I see this fabulous creativity across so many disciplines that I would not have imagined years ago would have any sort of qualitative sensibilities or be able to mount any qualitative tradition. But I think that increasingly people are realizing that the study of human complexities and social complexities is really relevant to so many aspects of the work we do. And that if we can sort of align that, not as a separate enterprise, often in a different laboratory, but if we can align it with how all of knowledge in our applied and practice disciplines is evolving, then we have the potential to really get a handle on some of the challenges that face us all.
It's a wonderful segue to our final question is why qualitative inquiry in 2026?
Well, in 2026, we see the complexities of the world increasing. I think that qualitative research invites you to engage with complexity as opposed to simplicity. And we see how many of the political and social challenges that we're facing in 2026 are fraught with people sitting in a particular position. This is the right answer. That's the wrong answer. This is the good people in this politic, and these are the bad people. And that isn't a reasonable way forward. If we envision a world that is better, a world without conflict and terrible wars, if we look toward peace, if we look toward a planet that is effective, if we look toward bringing systems together for human rights, for human dignity, for civil society, that's the kind of world that I envision. And I think that qualitative research really allows us to start to pull all those pieces together instead of those fractured ways of thinking about the world. So I philosophically, I see that embracing complexity and embracing the relationship between human experience and that complexity is part of the path forward.
Wonderful. Yeah, and it really is. If we think about just simple ideas come from complexity, we think about health, happiness, comfort. It's not a magical thing to just get to those. So this deeper thinking that we're all engaged in is really powerful. Wonderful. I just want to check, see if anyone on the team has any questions, if there's anything, Sally, that came to your mind before we close out.
I'm just really excited about the course and looking forward to it.
Are you going to be in it again, Paul?
I hope so.
I
would think you've been through it so many times. You're entitled to take a break.
The
one thing I did want to say is that if you Google Sally Thorne, the person you get now is the Australian, spelled the same way. She wrote that horrible book called The Hating Game, and it is now, she's written several, but unfortunately it's now been elevated to it's going to be a major motion picture. And so Googling me, well, the top line in Google will always be the Australian Sally Thorne who wrote The Hating Game. And you can just imagine seeing my philosophy of life, how antithetical that is. So people can Google me to get the open access link really easily, but just make sure they get the right Sally Thorne.
Right, exactly. That's a different material if you hit the wrong link. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. It's always fabulous taking time. And I know it's a little earlier in the day there for you, but we really appreciate it. And as Paul said, we're all looking forward. When the admin's kind of like, figure out where we'll be assigned and everything, there's always kind of a cool, comfortable conversation about, well, winds up with Sally? We're all raising our hands. So,
We'll see. I
Yeah.
mean, I get excited. In some ways, I'm set in my ways, as Paul knows, because he's been through it before, and I'm not likely to modify too much. Although, yeah, I'm sure some things will be modified, but
Yeah.
and each group is different. There's
Right.
sort of you can just tell by faces, even in the Zoom room, you can tell by
Yes.
faces whether you're hitting or not. So, wish
Yeah.
me luck.
Yeah. And you're absolutely so responsive that, it all falls in flow. So it's great. All right.
Give it a try.
So, yeah. thank
Okay.
you very
Thanks so
much.
much. Have a
Yeah.
great day. It's lovely to see your faces, and we'll see some or all of you in
Absolutely.
the summer.
Yeah.